So welcome back to our conversation about the human animal and the human predicament. And today I would like to ask a very simple question, that is, what is sacred? What is sacred to our people? What is sacred to our culture? And how might that help us navigate our current predicament? Because we hear a lot of conversation and recommendations about policy. Maybe we should adjust our energy policy in a particular way. Maybe we should change the way we do transportation or start producing more or less of something. Maybe we should change the laws or elect different politicians. And those conversations are worth having, but underneath all of that is the question of what do we value? Now, you might be curious about how much attention we pay to this very issue. What about our conversation around the word sacred? And this is from Google, their Ngram viewer that tracks the frequency of various words in the digitized books that they put together. And you can see what's happened here. The word sacred had a peak sometime back in the early 1800s. And it's declined ever since. And so now in our secular society, we don't really use the word sacred very much. And this fact alone, I think, is worth a conversation. What is something sacred? Well, if you're religious, you might associate that word with a particular deity, some sort of supernatural entity of some kind. But the word sacred simply means something is very important. We hold something to be of great significance, and we hold it with a certain reverence. Now, in the world of Native people and indigenous people, this is absolutely clear. People understood this and still understand this. And some of the things that we have held to be sacred, the land, habitat, obviously, the community, the tribe, food, water, ancestors, and descendants, all of these things are explicitly held to be sacred, of great importance to the people. What about the modern world? What about us? What do we hold to be sacred? And this is very clear. We don't say this explicitly, but you can tell from observing our behavior what we hold to be sacred. And this list here, I think, is very explanatory. This is who we are, and this is what we value. Now, you might remember a few years ago, John Oliver did a presentation and an interview with Amazon warehouse people. And there was an interview with a warehouse manager, and she was responsible for working with a facility like this. And she talked about the challenges involved and some of that, and her conclusion was, well, speed is sacred in our world. That's a new thing. People never used to talk that way. And look at this one. Your inbox is a sacred space. Wow. I never thought of it that way. Right? My inbox is a mess, but I sure wouldn't call it sacred. And here's the clown talking about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That number is sacred. And in his case, that might be the only sacred thing in his world. Another perspective on this, that we are so interested in safety, and we put so much energy into trying to control the world and exercise power over the world, that also, the safetyism, becomes sacred as well. And the eco-theologian Michael Dowd used to talk about the fact that modern culture is driven by this invisible religion, progress, man over nature. And so it's no surprise that we get these kinds of results. Two very simple Google searches. The economy is sacred, almost 1 million hits. Versus the biosphere is sacred, only 8 results. That tells you everything you need to know about the modern world and modern culture. This is our value system here. Another perspective, another thing that we hold to be sacred in the modern world is ourselves. Yeah. Our individual orientation, our narcissism. The self is sacred too. Yeah. And we see this all over the place. This intense focus on our own personal lives and our own personal welfare. You can see it all over the language. People didn't used to talk this way. This is a new thing. People didn't used to talk this way either. Now, you might look at this and say, well, that's just primate narcissism. This is people falling in love with their own lives. And I think that's true, but it's also true to say that this is a stress response, because when the big world seems so overwhelming and so difficult and so intimidating that we retreat to the self. And that's perfectly understandable. And it's even driven by some of our therapeutic teaching, you might say, because some people say, well, only focus on that which you can control. And you've probably heard that advice before. And well, that makes sense, yeah. But what's the most controllable thing in your life? Well, it's your own body and your own personal welfare. And so that's what we do. We get frightened, we get overwhelmed, and we retreat into the self, and thus our narcissism. But the consequences are severe. Now here's Thomas Berry, the great eco-theologian, talking about the great conversation that we used to have with the natural world, and how little by little in the modern age, we've relinquished that conversation. We don't talk to the cosmos anymore. We don't talk to the biosphere anymore. We're only talking to ourselves. So what is sacred? What should be sacred? And you would think that we would have some appreciation here for our own life support system, the thing that's keeping us alive. And you would think that we would hold that to be sacred. And yet we don't. And isn't that telling? It's almost as if we are not that interested in our own survival. And here's our predicament. The planet, the biosphere, that is our lifeboat. And if you're out in this situation, there's one thing that's sacred above all else, and that's the integrity of your lifeboat. All of this, just on this pale blue dot. Carl Sagan used to talk about the biosphere and the dimensions of the biosphere. And he talked about it's such a thin layer. You take the biosphere and the atmosphere surrounding the Earth, and proportionally, it's such a thin layer that it's very much akin to taking a basketball and wrapping a layer of cellophane around the basketball. It's that thin, that narrow, and also that fragile. Yeah, it can and is being degraded by our activity. And if we can't hold that to be sacred, I don't really know what else would matter. So I think that's the task before us, is to shift our value system. Yes, we need to talk about policy, we need to talk about laws, we need to talk about politicians and getting better politicians in office. Yes, of course. But our value system is what really matters here. If we can change our value system, then we've got a shot at having some kind of a functional future. So yes, the biosphere must be sacred. So that's my presentation, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time. Cheers.